Okay, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on February 12th, 2014. I'm a day early because so many of you have sent me so many emails. I had to talk about this, and we'll get to that in a minute. I am recording take 2 of part 1 because once again, mysteriously, for the second time in about 3 weeks, YouTube crashed on me right in the middle of trying to record this news and views. But what I want to talk about are all of the banker suicides. At first, it was just merely suspicious. Now it's extremely suspicious, and I want to talk about 3 different articles. I hope it will dovetail with part 2 relatively well. I thought part 1 might have been saved in the first take, but again, YouTube botched it again. So I'm redoing part 1 and hoping that my segue into part 2 will be more or less smooth. The first thing I want to talk about is an article from our friend Tyler Durden over at Zero Hedge, who is talking about, quote, another J.P. Morgan banker dies, 37-year-old executive director of program trading. And he says this, listen carefully, there's a little detail in here that may connect to other things. He says, quote, ordinarily, we would ignore the news of another banker's death. After all, these sad events happen all the time. If it wasn't for several contextual aspects of this most recent passage. First, the death in question, as reported by the Stanford Daily Voice, is that of Ryan Henry Krane, a Harvard graduate who is survived by his wife, son, and parents at the very young age of 37. And our deepest sympathies to Mr. Crane's family. Quote, second, Ryan Henry Krane was formerly employed by J.P. Morgan, a bank which was featured prominently in the news as recently as 2 weeks ago when another of its London-based employees committed suicide by jumping from the top floor of its Canary Wharf building. Third, Krane was an executive director of J.P. Morgan's Global Program Trading Desk, founded in 1999 as a function of the firm which is instrumental in preserving J.P. Morgan's impeccable, so far in 2013, flawless trading record of zero trading losses, unquote. And then Zero Hedge goes on to list Mr. Ryan's survivors, among whom is a brother of his by the name of Lex, who apparently lives in Denver, Colorado. Which brings us to the story of Mr. Richard Talley. All right, this is the man that owned a title company in Colorado that was found suicided, and I don't know about you, but committing suicide with a nail gun by injecting your skull with 8 nails and then a final kill shot right at the back of the base of the skull where it touches the spine is not an easy thing to do. Now, let's stop right there. That's a message, folks, and I talk about that in part 2. That's a message. No one commits suicide this way. I personally couldn't even get a nail gun to the back of my head to do all the things that he apparently did 8 times, all right? Usually 1 nail in the back of the head would be sufficient, all right? So it's clear that this man was the victim of foul play, in my opinion. Now, let's notice something that Zero Hedge points out about Mr. Talley besides owning a title company. What do title companies do? They research titles. They clear titles for mortgages. We'll get back to that. But Zero Hedge points out that before Mr. Talley moved to Colorado, he had been a regional financial officer at Drexel Burnham Lambert in Chicago. All right? He apparently had also founded a number of title companies, and these are listed at Zero Hedge, and I will post these links for you at the end of part 2. He was apparently the founder of American Escrow, Clear Title, Clear Creek Financial Holdings, Swift Basin, Sumar, American Real Estate Services, and the American Alliance of Real Estate Professionals. In other words, title companies over and over, all right? Now, that too suggests a significant pattern. And then Zero Hedge went on to say this, quote, "It would appear, unfortunately, that Mr. Talley was not an entirely honest man. Talley's 1989 wedding announcement in the Chicago Tribune noted that he was, quote, a member of the 1980 U.S. Olympic swimming team, unquote. A spokesman for USA Swimming on Thursday said Talley was not on the team, unquote." Now, personally, I would not have made the conclusion that Zero Hedge made. It's entirely possible when we're dealing in this world of suicided bankers by nail gun and bankers jumping off the 33rd floor of a banking building in London onto the roof of a 9-story building. Do the numerology there, folks. When we're dealing with this, it's entirely possible that Mr. Talley may not have even known that this was run in the Chicago Tribune. He may not have been aware. A legend may have been created around him. Who knows? It happens. So I wouldn't make that conclusion. But now, here's an interesting thing. This is from an article at Mother Jones, all right? And the article points out that there is a company, I believe it's called Blackstone, that has gone around the entire country buying up foreclosed houses, flipping them, and making them rental properties. And, let's go further, they're now bundling these rental homes in new derivatives. All right? So in other words, folks, think of all the housing bubble, all of the mortgage fraud that we saw going on in the 2008 bubble, and the resulting collapse, and the fact that mortgages played such a huge role in credit default swaps in the creation of derivatives. All right? So in other words, what it appears that this company is doing is they're updating, rehashing, repackaging the same thing that led to the first housing bubble and to the financial crisis of 2008. They're updating it now with rental homes as part of the deal. All right? And interestingly enough, this is an article from Mother Jones, by the way. Interestingly enough, the banks that appear to be involved in this whole thing with Blackstone are Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, and J.P. Morgan Chase. All right? So in other words, these are the major investors involved in doing the same thing again that they were doing prior to 2008. Now, if that's not enough for you to make little alarm bells go off, and remember, Mr. Talley did what? He was a title guy, all right? If there's anyone in a position to know about mortgage fraud, it would be Mr. Talley. And given so many companies, maybe he saw a pattern, all right? Now, there's a final little take that I'll leave you with before we end part 1, take 2, and continue to part 2, take 1. Okay? And this is an article from Jim Willey. And it's a very short article. I wasn't able to access the article itself, but there are statements summarizing what he did say on a particular website, and I want to read these to you. Quote, Willey, who recently sat down with the doc for an exclusive interview, the doc not being me, revealing the smoking gun proving gold rehypothecation by U.S. officials. Willey emphasizes that we are not seeing bad bankers removed. We are witnessing bankers taken out who are on the verge of revealing big data details. The bankers' hits are being done by the bad guys to keep men from singing after they flipped during prosecution investigation. Now let's stop right there. What Willie's suggesting is that there are local investigations, perhaps at state levels, into this whole process of mortgage fraud. That's what he's suggesting. And he's suggesting that somehow these suicided bankers were willing to cooperate with authorities after they were made aware of investigations. All right? Willie goes on to say this. All of these suicided bankers have been working with police teams and continental cops like Interpol. One Fed guy discovered some, listen carefully, some Bush giant multi-billion-dollar fraud and was ready to report it. Another economist was hit by the Bush gang before he sang against them. In other words, he was murdered. It is unclear which is bigger, Vatican links to drug money or links to Forfex fraud theft or their control room for Nazis, unquote. So in other words, there's a link to previous multi-billion-dollar fraud, to mortgage problems, and to drug money. All right, and to see what it is, what I think may be going on, I'll see you on the flip side in part 2. Take care, everybody.